professionals, midwifery students, and anyone thinking about a career in the maternity services. My job is bringing together the latest thinking area by area so you do not have to. Not only do you get the video of brilliant talks and relevant content in thematic box sets, you also get access to the audio version so you can listen on the commute or while you walk the dog. Plus links to the latest research in the relevant field, government policy documents, the presenter's PowerPoint, and more besides. Sign up to Matflix now for the best video streaming from maternity experts.
We have had a 40% caesarean section rate in the National Maternity Hospital. That is major abdominal surgery.
Around 40,000 mums did not return to work in 2022. It's even more relevant if you're a mum who's experienced birth trauma.
We spend more money on litigation than we currently spend on the maternity services. It's bonkers.
It's in all of our interests, and particularly the government, to improve maternity services.
We can't achieve our mission unless we bring parents and professionals together.
A revolution needs to happen. We need to start working together.
I know it's a hard time, but for goodness sake, it's the best profession in the world.
Be proud to be midwives, be proud of the job that we do, and continue to celebrate our successes.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Maternity Midwifery Hour. This is Series 17, Session 7. My name's Sue MacDonald and I'm the curator for the Maternity and Midwifery Hour and the Maternity and Midwifery Festivals, and it's my pleasure to be chairing the session this evening, which I know you're going to find really interesting. And we're joined by Dr. Jackie Williams from the NMC. And because we always do this to our guests, we always ask them to share a moment of the week. So, Jackie, please share your moment of the week with us.
Thank you for inviting me, Sue.
Welcome.
Delighted to be here. I've had quite a busy week, but my particular highlight was listening to the webinar from the International Confederation of Midwives yesterday, because they have just relaunched their standards for regulation. And I think the reason that was so pleasing was that how those standards are going to really help countries that don't have regulation of midwives, something we very much perhaps take for granted in the UK and Europe. But of course, many countries, they're not regulated. So I think some standards that can help them work with government, their own governments within their own context to get regulation of midwives has all got to be good, not just for the midwives, but importantly for women and babies and their safety.
Fabulous. That's a very excellent moment of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. Right, okay, well, I'll just remind now. I know, because I know there's some new people with us this evening, and welcome to you. And I hope you enjoy this evening, and you become a nice regular. And I know that we'll have a lot of regular participants, because we always do. And those are the people who come up with some lovely questions. And I know Jackie's going to be able to answer lots of questions at the end of the session, because we always leave time for that. But just to kind of let people know where we came from, because the Maternity Midwifery Hour is a little bit different, because we were born right at the beginning of the first UK pandemic, UK shutdown. Now, what do you call it? Lockdown. I'm even forgetting the words, for goodness sake. Because that was a time, and some of you will remember it, certainly if you're in clinical practice or in education, very busy time, very scary time, and a time when we weren't allowed to go and meet at study days or conferences or festivals. And we felt with the forum that we needed something to bring people together and provide some information, but also that connection at a time that was so stressful. And initially we did a lot about COVID-19. We did a lot about service changes and alterations and adaptations that midwives were making, which were really fascinating and very innovative, and some of which have stayed with us. Some of which we've been able to return kind of to normal, which has been lovely also. And also within education, of course. So it was a very busy time, but we've kind of carried on. We don't talk so much about COVID except to say where we came from, because now we can engage fully in face-to-face events and study days and conferences, but we've kept this maternity hour as a kind of a place that we can discuss as many things midwifery as we can get in, and people seem to enjoy it, which is great. And what's been lovely is when people come forward with ideas and send them in to the team, and they come through to me to say, well, how about talking about such and such, or how about I've got some work I'd love to share with you. And that's always lovely. So if any of you out there want to come and share some work you're doing, some research you're doing, please let us know, because then we can invite you and you can be part of it, which is lovely. Be absolutely super. Now, the other thing is, everything we do is recorded. So if you should have, as one of our speakers once had a few years, about 3 years back, if you have a power cut because a mouse eats through your broadband cable, don't panic, because everything's recorded and you can catch up, and you'll have a link certainly on Friday and then next Wednesday to catch up with. And that's very important, because one of the important things that we believe is that we want you to share. So tonight you're going to learn some new things. You're going to maybe have some of your thinking challenged. So I know Jackie, she might just put something in your mind and make you think, I didn't know that. How does that work? We really would like you to sort of go and share with your colleagues and have a discussion about it. That helps in several ways. It helps you understand what you're hearing, one, and two, if you're doing something like revalidation, this is fantastic because it pops it in your brain, but also gives you the opportunity to put it on a piece of paper to put in your personal portfolio and your evidence for your revalidation. And that can be really useful. Also, if you're doing any study or projects or any service changes you're trying to develop, the place to go is the Mapflix. Now, everything that's recorded is kept by the Mapflix, and you'll see in the resources that Paul has able to share with you on the Facebook program. With Mapflix, everything's there and you can access it, especially if your institution or your university or your maternity unit has a link up with Mapflix and a subscription. But you can have a subscription personal to yourself, which you could get tax relief on it. And if you want to know about that, do ask and we can give you some information on that. But it does mean that you can go in there and delve. Health warning for you. Once you start delving into looking at a particular topic, it's a bit like any literature research you've ever done. And I'm sort of thinking those who are students or everlasting students, you'll find you can start looking and then you'll think, oh, that's interesting. Let me go and see that. Oh, and you find yourself a couple of hours later having looked at lots of different things. It's a lovely way of learning. But just to warn you, you might spend more time than you expected at the end of it. But that's grand. Now, I'm going to have to say that these new regulations, standards for regulation, we'll try and get that's a link up for you for next week on the resources sheet. I was just thinking as Jackie was talking. And just news flashes. Now, obviously, Storm Melissa has been big in the news over the last 24 hours or so, and we do send our love and our prayers to the people in who have to face Storm Melissa. Very, very scary when you see the images. It's really scary. And I do want to say a thank you to one of my friends who sent me a fantastic link of a little video, and it's a kind of like a reggae anthem by Julian Rogers called Hold On Jamaica, and it's wonderful. And the only problem with it is it's at the back, it's like an earworm. And once I'd heard it, I've been playing it quite a lot for today. So I've put that on your resources because I think it's a really powerful image of how when a whole country and a whole group of people are facing the most awful adversity and the scariest thing imaginable, they're hanging together, they're being together, and that's really important. And that can be important for us as midwives as well. We haven't got an anthem like that. We'll have to share the Jamaican one, but that's okay. Also, and I've had to say this a few times, the world seems as though it's gone crazy in some ways. And horrible news from Darfur, which is unimaginable what's happening out there, a real humanitarian crisis. And of course, it's with women, babies and children who always are at the sharp end of all of this, literally. Just awful. Other news, we've had the UK morning after pill being made available from pharmacies on the NHS today. Right, that's one bit of health news. And then there was something just came up on a Twitter feed for me. This is as firework approaches in the UK, which is the 5th of November. It's always a big thing. I think it's any excuse for a nice big bonfire and some baked potatoes and a few fireworks going off. But advice to mums with babies and new babies, it's probably better to avoid going to any sort of firework events until the baby's about 6 months old. So maybe take a cozy day or so instead, because it's more the sort of stimulation of all that going on, plus their little precious little ears. Look after them. That's for you mums, but also for midwives maybe to pass on to mums. And also we're coming to the end of Black History Month, and this is almost a little moment of the week for me, because it was quite something. We've had lots of Black midwives, Black student midwives, which has been lovely, being celebrated, especially by the Royal College of Midwives. So big thank you to them for highlighting. And this, over the last few days, we've had Sarah Chitingo and Wendy Oliwola. And I always have problems with Wendy's name. Sorry, Wendy. And also Lee Shea Woodstock and Alice Mawete, which is fabulous. So nice to see. But the other thing was, there was on the Black Midwifery, the Black History Month, I found a wonderful clip of nurses going through a little fashion show of uniforms through the ages, and you know what we're like about uniforms. This was fantastic, and it's just so sassy and full of joy. I've also put that link on because it's just a little couple of minutes video, but these nurses and midwives just walking along in their different uniforms from different times, hats, one of them with a little suitcase. It just brings you a little smile to you, and I think we need a bit of a smile in our life. Oh, right, I've got over almost at 7:10, which is my aim for every maternity midwifery hour. So this evening we're going to be looking at supporting choice for all women in the maternity journey, and we've got Jackie Williams to discuss that with us from a Nursing Midwifery Council point of view. And we're going to look at how the NMC has worked with key stakeholders to develop the principles that we need to use in our practice. And we know Jackie because she's been on the maternity hour many times, which is it's lovely, and she's always very open and very clear in what the NMC are doing. And it's always lovely to have someone from the NMC that can fire questions at if there's something we don't quite follow. But Jackie's sort of roots is as a midwife, obviously, and a very experienced midwife, academic. She's got over 30 years involvement in pre and post-reg midwifery programs, and she's always kept very close links with midwifery practice and is passionate about the unique role of the midwife and women-centred care. Also a senior fellow with the Higher Education Academy, and she's got particular expertise in quality assurance. She's also an experienced midwife expert witness. I don't know how you'd fit that in anyway, Jackie, I'm not sure. And her doctoral work researched whether or not resilience develops in student midwives as they navigate the undergrad midwifery programme, and her current role is at the NMC to support the development of the new midwifery education standards and the wider work on midwifery matters across the NMC. So welcome, Jackie. Thank you so much for coming this evening. The screen is now yours.
Thank you for inviting me. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about why the NMC produced these principles that were published towards the end of the summer in August. And importantly, what this sort of means really for midwives and their employers, and importantly for women. So if I could have the next slide, please. So at the NMC, we regularly receive queries from midwives on our register. And we were finding that we were getting increasing number of queries from midwives talking about their role when women were choosing to have care outside of guidance. And they were also telling us about women who were free birthing and what their involvement was. And more worryingly, we were also hearing about a range of unregulated people. And that sounds a very clunky sort of title, but it tries to describe a sort of a collection of people who are not registered with us. So they're not midwives, but they are supporting women in birth. They may call each other themselves, for example, doulas. They may call themselves birth keepers, and there is other sort of titles they use. But for the purpose of what we were thinking about when some of the concerns were raised, we sort of collectively talked about them being unregulated people because they weren't on our register. And interestingly, some of those people had never been a midwife. And there was also a group that also had been midwives but had come off our register. And I think I want to say right at the beginning that doulas do a fantastic job. And I'm going to show you a little clip later on where we've actually worked with doulas to try and talk about our different roles, but importantly, how we work together, because doulas do a fantastic job in supporting women psychologically and socially when they perhaps need that support or they can't get it from other people or they want it in addition. And it's very much about how we work together in partnership. But the concerns that were being raised were things that perhaps could impact on women's safety and was very much stepping into the midwife's role. And of course, when we looked at these sort of collection of issues that were coming forward from various places, a lot of the issues were not actually for the NMC to do anything about. It was not our role. But midwives were certainly concerned, and a lot of them were concerned for their PIN, their personal and their status on the register. And then, of course, there were some other issues raised that where a baby is born and the midwife was not present, what happens to the birth notification? And for those of you who are dialing in today from overseas, in the UK, the midwife, when they actually do all their paperwork to gain NHS numbers so that they can access NHS care, they're automatically now completing a birth notification to the registrar. We used to do that manually, but it's all sort of done automatic. And the reason that's done is so that that notification can then be married up when the parents or the mother goes to register that birth within 42 days of the birth. And the idea is that there is some safeguarding to make sure that that baby that was born is actually then being registered in the right name under the right processes. Next slide, please. So what this was sort of raising for us is that some of the things that people were reporting us was potentially going against Article 44 and 45. And these are our rules under the Council Order of 2001. And this talks about protected title in Article 44 and protected function of a midwife in Article 45. And in this country, UK, midwifery is regulated as a distinct profession. And within Article 44, that you cannot call yourself a midwife unless you are regulated and are on our register. And it is protected by law. And it has a protected legal function associated with the title. So it is an offence for someone to practice as a midwife while not registered with us, or falsely claim to have a midwifery qualification, or to use the title of midwife when not entitled to do so. And this is sort of strictly adhered to. And of course, this is all about safety of the public. Thank you. Next slide. And within Article 44, this talks about who can actually attend a woman in childbirth. Now, this is quite old-fashioned language, and it's very legal legal language. So it's not talking about actually going and being, going to a woman and being there. This is actually being attending upon in terms of giving actual physical care. And that is actually restricted to a midwife or a registered medical practitioner or a student undergoing training. And of course, there is an exception if there is a sudden or an urgent necessity. So what that's actually saying is that only the midwife or the doctor or those students can actually give that physical care. And when we talk about childbirth, we're talking about the labour, the birth itself, and those few hours immediately after. It doesn't include antenatal or postnatal, because actually there could be a range of people who actually would be also caring for the woman this space. So the protected function is, but it doesn't preclude, as I've described already, say a doula who's there to give that psychological support. But what we were beginning to hear, and this is all anecdotal, it's because we hear this almost second, third hand, that midwives were going to a woman's home, and it's often the community midwives, where a woman had recently given birth, and there were people there, as well as a range of instruments, a range of drugs that were sort of in the room, as well as the woman having had an episiotomy. And of course, this is very challenging because, as I say, this is, we're hearing this several hands away, and of course the women have employed people, so they're under their sort of employment, if you like. So there was no doubt that we needed to do something, but because obviously these concerns were being raised, but really it was a case of what do we do? Thank you. Next slide. So one of the things we realised is that there was very, very little data in this space. And what I'm just going to show you really is just some highlights from the survey that we did over a complete year. And they're only literally a snapshot. We're not saying this is detailed research in any way. We're not going to actually publish this, but it was just to try and get a sense of what the situation is with free births during this period of time. Thank you. Next slide, please. So we put it all out to across the UK, and it probably doesn't surprise you that there were definitely more free births in England than there was perhaps in the other countries. But what was really fascinating, that out of the 142 free births that were recorded during that year, then 39 of those were actually Northern Ireland. And of course, one of the things which was really interesting was that not everybody actually recorded the data on the free births. And of course, it got slightly confused with babies that are born before the arrival of a midwife. So the woman has, given birth quite quickly, although there was every intention that the midwife would be there. And of course, we need to really define the difference between someone who is actually choosing to free birth and those that were just unplanned before the arrival of the midwife. Next slide, please. So one thing we found from this snapshot of some of the survey was that there was definitely a higher proportion of women who did receive antenatal care than those that did not, which is interesting in itself, because that means that these women were not necessarily unknown to the trust or the health board. But again, not all of the free births had that information, but there were some information about where 53 out of the 24 free births were planned and intentional, but the women did receive antenatal care. 24 out of the 124 births were planned and intentional, but they didn't receive any antenatal care. There were some that were home births, but then they were planned home births, but then they only asked the midwives only to provide care in an emergency. So that very much was up to their request. And then there was a slightly more, an interesting fact that out of those 124 free births, they were actually planned to be home births. But when it actually came to the time of going into labour and birthing, the organisation was unable to provide a midwife to attend. And there was various reasons for that. Nearly half did have doulas in attendance, and there was also other people that were potentially providing medical or clinical care, but were not necessarily regulated. Next slide, please. We also asked whether any outcomes were recorded for the free births, and 2/3 of the free births that had been recorded did record outcomes, and 65% of those 92 free births recorded no complications at all, but 16% did have some maternal health complications such as hemorrhage or infection, and 16% recorded neonatal health complications such as low APGAR score and injury, and 3% recorded some psychological outcomes such as birth trauma, mental health concerns. There were other outcomes such as undiagnosed breech, shoulder dystocia, there was a stillbirth and 2 neonatal deaths. And whilst it is not illegal to have a free birth, it's not necessarily a safeguarding concern. Within 17% of the recorded free births, they did lead to a safeguarding referral because a disclosure of concerns had been made. Next slide, please. So what did we do? Well, having got that sort of data ongoing, we held a stakeholder meeting in last year in June, and really trying to discuss the way forward, because there was a lot of concerns, and it was a mixture, as you can see, of issues around free birth, unregulated people, other related issues. And we pulled together the stakeholders from very senior leaders across the UK, including the chief midwifery officers and the Royal Colleges, an obstetrician. Importantly, we needed service user voice. We had safeguarding lead, birthrights, Doula UK, and also the ambulance service and the police. And you might think, gosh, why on earth did they bring all these people in? Well, of course, the ambulance service are very much involved when maybe a free birth takes place and perhaps the trust or the health board is unable or is not willing to send a midwife out, and they are advised to call an ambulance. And of course, in the UK, you wouldn't necessarily get a highly trained paramedic. Who you may get a technician who, whilst also trained, has very little experience of births. And that obviously was putting them in a very, very difficult situation, because they were often then very much tied up with caring for that woman, and then obviously not being able to go out to doing their other duties. And of course, the police were important, because if we've got concerns that people are acting within the childbearing space that shouldn't be, they would be only the people able to take action. And of course, within our midwifery team, we had other colleagues from standards, employer link service, policy and communications and legal. So quite a big group, as you can see. Next slide, please. And from that group, we decided to go into 3 task and finish groups and focus on what the specific concerns were in this area for the woman, the midwife, and the employers in the trusts and the health boards. And we met on 3 occasions to try and think about what we could do. And by this time, we were beginning to think, well, actually, this isn't just about free birth. This isn't just about women who are asking for things outside of guidance. This is actually, what choice is it for all women, and what could these principles very much align to that? Next slide, please. So we brought those principles together. They were published in August, I think it's important to say that they aren't a guideline. They're not going to give real specifics, which in some respects, which is what midwives were asking for. But there are sets of principles which are very much structured around what a woman can expect from the maternity services, what a midwife requires, and what employers should also consider. And absolutely at the heart of these principles are the women's views, preferences, and decisions based on receiving evidence-based advice and information so they can make those choices. One of the things that we were hearing from midwives is that often the policies and the guidance within their trusts and health boards were perhaps in conflict with how they should uphold the code and their standards of proficiency. So what we're really hoping now is that conversations are going on to see how these principles can embed within the guidance and ensuring that things are not in conflict with a midwife's practice. Next slide, please. So these are the principles. We will have an easy read and a Welsh translation. That's really, really important. And we've held a webinar and videos, and delighted to come and do this evening because we really want to just get the information out. And one of the things that was really, really important was that we looked at our own processes, and we've got our own new criminal offences policy, a standing operating procedure. And the important thing of that is that because if you've got concerns about somebody, unlike if it was a midwife or a nurse or a nursing associate, one of our key roles is protection of the public, and one of the aspects we do that is people can raise a concern with us, but we can't do that for somebody we can't go down fitness to practice type processes because they're not on our register. But we do need to actually assess those risks and think about whether we need to do anything further if anybody was acting outside that Article 44 and 45. And for example, it might be writing a letter to cease and desist. We might be saying you change your website. You're giving the impression to women and families that you're a midwife. We can do that. And if we've got real concerns, we can actually refer to the police. So I think it was important for us to see what was within our gift as a regulator to do, but really important to work as in partnership with our stakeholders, because obviously midwives were raising concerns with us. And one of the things that we thought we really ought to think about is that, do women really know the difference between a midwife and a doula? And I think we're in a very challenging space at the moment in terms of maternity services really coming under scrutiny, and that fear that some women have, and the support and that doulas can give complementary to a midwife is really important. But we felt it was important that a midwife really knew the difference, a women and families knew the difference between. So we worked with Doula UK to develop this little video, which actually shows us trying to explain that. And this is very much for the public. We're going to show it to you now, but most importantly, we hope that you will show this to families when they're actually making some of these choices. So I shall pause for this short video to be played.
So at the NMC, we were getting a lot of queries from midwives, genuinely concerned about their role when women were making some choices around free birth, care outside of guidance, concerned perhaps about how they work with doulas and what their role was. And we decided to bring a multidisciplinary group together. It included Doula UK, it included the police, it included the ambulance service, and a range of people in midwifery roles. And having discussed and really tried to see what a way forward we could go to support midwives in this sort of challenging space, we decided to develop some individualised care principles, which actually can apply for all women. And they are divided into 3 sections, and it talks about what the woman can expect from service in terms of the sort of care, as well as being helpful advice to the midwife as to what they should expect and what their role is here, as well as the trust or health boards, and importantly what our role is sort of within the legislative framework. So we hope these principles will really help as women are sort of navigating some of these challenging times and making decisions, and ultimately work much more collaboratively together with everybody who's in this space.
Okay, thank you. We're just going to see if we can find the right video that actually shows the that was one of the videos that we actually showed to support the principles, but we've got another video hopefully that we can show you. So if I could just have the next slide. So what should be done if there are concerns about an unregulated person? Well, we've got a dedicated email address. Those concerns will be investigated. They may contact the individual, and if it really produced that high threshold, we may have to refer to the police. And I think that was probably my last. Yes. Thank you, Sue.
Okay, that's grand. Thank you very much, Jackie. That's really very helpful and quite thought-provoking, actually, because that's what when you were presenting about the number of births, I was thinking, gosh, that's even things like the 500 odd BBAs born before arrival. I'm thinking, gosh, that's a lot of births, which must have been really scary for the woman and her family to deal with, let alone anything else. And then thinking a lot, the provision of, when you were saying provision of medical clinical care without regulated people, that feels very uncomfortable to me. Very uncomfortable.
And it was very fortuitous, really. I came today because I listened to the Maternity Hour, Midwifery Hour last week, and you were talking to the doulas, and they were really describing their fantastic work, and they work within their code of conduct. And I think I do want to stress that this is absolutely the majority of doulas work. They're doing amazing work and really supporting, midwives where midwives, perhaps are facing challenges to give that continuity and that maybe some of that psychological support. But if we've got people who are working beyond that scope of what they should be doing, that is obviously concerning, because that does become a safety, to women and their families. And we do have a number of sort of cases that are sadly where things have happened and the coroner is involved. And I think in time we'll get more information. I think also it shows the importance really of collecting that data, doesn't it, really? And I think this is something that the NHS will now be sort of, thinking and taking forward to how do you get that proper data? How do you actually classify, these births instead of them all being classified collectively as BBAs, where actually some of them were intended free births. And I think we are working in a very challenging space. And I often describe a video that I watched of a number of women who free birthed. And they talked about why they chose to free birth. And these women really did take that decision very, very seriously. They thought it through, but they had to, in the end, prioritize their health and well-being, particularly their mental health, often over the safety of the babies. And that really struck me as, that they did not go into this at all without the evidence, without weighing up the pros and cons. And I have to also say this film showed they'd all had very positive outcomes. So, but I just think, I think it's just something that we've got to be very cognizant of, that women are making decisions. And whilst we've got sort of potentially all of this that's going on in the media, this is instilling fear with women. We've got, a rising cesarean rate. We've got a rising induction rate. Women will make their choices, so I think you can see how all of this is sort of coming about, but unless we have data and we can actually really, but the principles really are trying to raise awareness of some of the challenges and some of these discussions we've been having, and hopefully will be helpful going forward.
And I think now we all have this on the resources sheet as well. And I think I knew about this obviously because we've had discussions before, but seeing it in the print like this rather than reading it on the screen is really useful, because I can imagine this would be useful when you're having a discussion with a woman who said, I'm going to do a free birth, I don't want midwifery care, whatever, because it goes through the sort of things, the sort of questions or sort of information you need to make sure she's clear of. And I think, Jackie, you really highlighted the difficulty for women and their families at the moment, because in some ways the media have reported many things happening within the maternity services, and some of them, some of the reports that are going on that we've been discussing over the last year really make very uncomfortable kind of information for women as well as for midwives, and making them feel unsafe within our service is why some women are going to make that choice, isn't it?
Yeah,
they're going to say, well, I don't want to be induced, I don't want a cesarean section, And what is really, for me as a midwife, is so important is not saying, well, I know best, I'm a midwife, I know best. It's much more about, well, let's talk about it, and what sort of information do you need, what sort of services can we provide within this service locality before she makes the decision, because that's the important thing, that she has all the information to make that choice.
Yes, and I think that one of the things we were hearing, and I can understand why this has occurred, is that often to support that information giving, the women often go to see the obstetrician or the consultant midwife. But in a way, we need to equip all midwives to have these conversations, because often they're the ones then going to be in that situation when they're called to that woman, when she perhaps is, goes into labour, and then she's requesting things that perhaps would be outside that guidance, and they need to be part of that decision making.
And maybe we have to get over our difficulty, our uncomfortableness ourselves. That, because in a way you could feel it like a rejection. This woman doesn't want me as a midwife. It could feel like that for some midwives, isn't it? And yet, and if, for those of you watching, if you haven't accessed this, it's not too long a document. It's 21 pages. I've got mine in lovely colour because I like a bit of colour, but it's very clear. So you have the series of principles. You've got the role of the midwife is really clearly set out. So the mother, if you share, and I would see this as a document that you would be sharing with the mum
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
family. So it's very clear about what we should be thinking women are expecting and what they should be expecting from us. And I do remember discussing with mums when I used to do bookings, and I used to have my code of practice, my midwives rules. Actually, this is how old I am. I had my midwives rules just to make sure they were clear about what my role was, because a lot of women
Mm.
would come for booking and they didn't even know what a midwife was. I think now with the lovely program called The Midwife, women do know what midwives do to a certain extent, but I still think there's some muddle. And this document, if nothing else, gives a very clear picture about what the role is of a midwife,
I
and
think
also the protected function.
I think the challenge, of course, Sue, and this is something I've really not been able to resolve in my own mind, is that how uncomfortable midwives might feel, because the heart of this is the decisions and the views and the preferences, and I'm citing the language of our proficiencies now, are at the heart of this. And if the woman has all the information she needs to make that decision, she still may make a decision that could incur more risk, or might be not what we would advise to do. And but that is her decision to make, and that can be sometimes quite difficult to sort of work through when you're a midwife, to think, well, why would she do that when that maybe incurs more risk to her or a baby? But women in this country can accept care, but they can also decline care.
Of course.
They don't have, and I think that's something that we've got to sort of think about. And I think the midwives just need that support. They need that additional, perhaps, training. If they need to be upskilled, if they haven't had this sort of, certain training recently, but that senior support is really, really important. And being involved in the plan of care. But one of the things that we've got in our proficiencies 1.22 is to be able to advocate for the woman when a decision is outside of clinical guidance in order to minimize risk and maintain relationships. And for me, that's a really key proficiency, because actually, rather than actually saying, well, okay, you to the woman, you just sort of, you do what you want to do, but and not have that care. In a way, that doesn't reduce risk for me. But actually continuing to support her, but accepting that she may not be having the care, and what is your role to do to make sure you document all that very carefully, but not sort of in a situation where you're sort of cajoling or forcing her to take that care, or bullying. And
because I think in the olden days, people used to say refuse care, and it's almost like, right, that's the end of the discussion, rather than saying, okay, well, let you don't want this, now let's just look, because this might increase your risk of this, and this.
yeah.
Because I think you're absolutely, aren't you? Because if you just say, oh, well, just carry on, you're actually in breach of your role anyway, aren't you?
Yes, and I think the important thing is, by continuing to maintain that relationship, that gives those opportunities to say, well, this is what I would suggest to do now, and then the woman can refuse or accept. And by maintaining that relationship, she, there may be a compromise, or she might change her plan, depending on how her labour progresses. But I think, it isn't. These are not easy situations. And I heard from a very, very insightful director of midwifery, who actually had a free birth within a unit herself. But actually, what she did was she maintained that relationship with that woman, supported her midwives. And then, so they were absolutely adhering to the proficiencies and the code. And I think that woman did need more intervention. I think she actually ended up needing a cesarean section, but her experience was extremely positive, and she came back for a second birth. But it was because she was being listened to and cared for. And in a way, by being in the unit, in a way that reduced the risk, probably more than having a free birth in her own home some distance away. So I think it's a very challenging space for our midwives. But I think what we've tried to do with the principals is have the conversation, and then perhaps then for policies and guidance to maybe be looked at again, so that actually when midwives find themselves in this situation, they're very, very clear what the situation is and what is the plan.
No, that's fine. I think the key words I've scribbled down in big writing is the woman feels listened to and cared for. Because at the end of the day, that is one of the things that women, when there's a complaint or there's a big problem, that's the issue that they most come up with. Nobody listened to me. Nobody heard me. Thank you. You've put the perfect words, Jackie. Thank you. Now I've got someone is saying about the video. We're looking for the correct link at the moment. We were hoping there were no gremlins, but I think a gremlin got into the system. So sorry about that. But we'll make sure
the page to Angela. It's the second one to do, so hopefully he can find it.
So we'll make sure that the clip is there, and if it's not there by the end of the hour, we'll get it to everybody there. Fabulous. Angelo's going to put it at the end of the show. Is that okay?
Thank you so much.
That's okay. Now I've got a question from Amina. Hi, Amina. And she says, is it women with higher parity that are wanting to free birth? I don't know if you have that level of information, but I suspect you might have.
Not from our survey, but when I watched this video of some women who had free birth, and there was a sort of a mixture, but they were not necessarily high parity. Some were primary gravid women. They were having their first baby when they made these choices. Some had several free births. And I think the other thing that I learned, Sue, when I was sort of, exploring a little bit this and watching videos, is that within the group, they're not homogenous. They're not the same. So there's some women who that would be absolutely their lifestyle choice. That would be what they would want to do. And the first thing maybe would be when they ring, to say I've had a baby and I need to have the birth notified. And then right on the other end is the women who feel they've maybe had no choice, but they planned for a home birth. And then for whatever reason, that home birth service was, say, suspended. And they were almost felt they were sort of pushed into that choice. And then there's everything sort of in between. So, it's interesting in itself that we're not talking about the same reasons for why women might choose to free birth.
No, I mean, that's a very good point, isn't it? Because that in your presentation, you were talking about a small group of women who'd wanted a home birth and then there was nobody available. So, I mean, they in effect had a free birth or a BBA, born before arrival birth, but maybe they might not have wanted that choice with their onto home birth, because of course home birth facility has been impacted hugely over the last 4 or 5 years, actually, especially with COVID and everything. So that's been a big thing.
And we even heard about women who maybe just live just over, say, a border, a county border. So within a mile and a half of, say, a home birth service, and they couldn't access it. So it was very variable. I mean, depending on a bit of a postcode lottery, if you like, depending on where you lived. So I think these principles also make it clear. And I think it's important just to say that these are not NMC principles. No. These were written by this stakeholder group. And then, a lot of people actually inputted into, trying to get the words right and the language and whatever. But, it was very clear that all women should have the full choice of where to give birth, because that is certainly maybe wasn't the case for some of the women.
And of course, how do you? I mean, the other thing is, as you were talking, I was thinking, there's women who might make a choice to do free birth, and then at some point they're thinking, oh, I don't really want to do this after all. So we have to kind of give them a kind of get out clause, or make sure it's like any choice. I was thinking about, when you do the birth plan and people say, oh, she's got the birth plan and that's what you have to follow. And yet we all know that women, once they go into labour, You know, their wishes and their choices might change, and we have to ensure that they know what their choices are as the labour and the birth unfold.
Yeah, and this is why I cited that particular proficiency, because for me that is a pivotal one. Because if the woman is told, well, we can't send a midwife, this is what you want, just phone an ambulance, which, as I described, puts the ambulance service in difficulty. How do you then continue to maintain that relationship to reduce the risk and give the woman almost that opening to say, actually, no, I think I would like to do this. So and it's not about sort of cajoling her to do that, but giving her the opportunity in that safe relationship to say, actually, I think I've changed my mind, I want to do this, or I want to do that. Or, you know, I did say I didn't want you in the room, but now I do. You know, I mean, it's very much working with the women, isn't it? But if they're sort of pushed to one sort of extreme.
Control, and we're back to the choices and control bit, aren't we? And
There's one thing one thing I haven't sort of mentioned, Sue, is obviously about, and I mentioned it on the slides, about midwives worrying about their PINs, worried about being referred. And I think what I've had to say to midwives is anybody can refer a midwife. And in fact, not so much now, but midwives were very much more likely to be referred by a member of the public than anybody else. Interestingly, nursing has sort of caught up, really, so there's not such a difference. But even if you were referred, it doesn't really indicate whether there is a case to answer, or it would progress through a fitness to practice. I think it's important to say that even being referred is an awful thing to happen, you know, devastating to the individual. But in this country, we want people to have the right to refer, you know, if they've got genuine concerns. But I think the important thing is really to get your documentation really clear, so that it's very clear whether you know, that you've offered that particular care at that particular time, and whether that was refused or whether they would have accepted something, you know, less to what you were offering. We got a lot of questions, as you can imagine, since we've published this, and we are going to produce a fact sheet to sort of accompany those. So have a look out for that. That will come probably later on in the autumn, early winter, so that we've got time to do that. But it was interesting that, and I think if people, and some of the what we're including within the fact sheet is actually advice from the Do the UK and the Birthrights, because we were getting into sort of questions about, well, should women sign a disclaimer or things like this? And of course, you know, it's very difficult to those sort of situations, and it's very unlikely that, you know, that would be even be upheld, really. But I'm hoping the fact sheet will sort of tease out some of the more legal type sort of issues. But you know, it's a challenging space, and it's an interesting as to why these decisions are being made.
I think the legal fact sheet, this sounds a really good idea, Jackie. Because
well, it's not a legal fact sheet; it's just a fact sheet.
Fact sheet's on the background information.
Yeah, and it's got some legal perspective. It will have some legal.
Because you're right, people do worry about their PIN, and I must do this, and I think sometimes might get into getting women to sign disclaimers or sign that they don't want this, that, and the other, and that, for me, always feels a bit like bullying women into doing something, but because you're wanting to cover yourself, which, and in a way you're not, are you?
Well, no, it is your record, being very honest about your records and your narrative. So it's very clear about what happened, and also why you did what you did. And you know, we were not able to answer questions like where a midwife should sit, whether she should be in the car or out the car or whatever. That's absolutely a local type. And as I said, these principles are not a guideline, really. But you know, I think it has raised some really important issues, and conversations need to continue, really.
No, I think absolutely. Well, perfect. Well, I'm going to kind of bring together now, because we're going to do the video just after we close the kind of finish. But I'm going to say a big thank you to Jackie for joining us this evening,
Pleasure.
sharing the principles available online and printable on 21 sheets, especially back to back, save paper. There we are. And I'm going to also say optimistic October. You know, I have hardly used this. Well, I have used it, but not on the hour. And I'm going to say today was meant to be plan a fun or exciting activity to look forward to. Well, after this hour, you can go off and plan something. And tomorrow, this is you just have one little task that you're meant to do every day. Tomorrow's task is identify 3 things that give you hope for the future. I think we need that in the world today. Anyway, so huge thanks to Jackie. Thank you also to Angela, who's found the correct link for us, which is fabulous. Also, thanks to Paul for sending the questions through to me. I should have said that's why I keep just glancing over there, because that's where the questions are coming through. Just to remind people that resources will be available on the website, and that you'll get this link at 6 o'clock in the morning for the whole rerun on Friday morning, or next Wednesday in the newsletter. If you haven't subscribed to the Maternity and Midwifery Forum newsletter, it's free. Subscribe. You get lots of information. You get nice bite-sized articles of really up-to-date contemporary stuff, and links also, which is really good. And I need to remind you that for those of you student midwives experience and the midwifery education festivals are both on the 12th of November, based at Leicester. But obviously we have an online activity also, so you can register for that. Also, if you fancy coming to Edinburgh, we've got on the 25th of November our festival in Edinburgh, our Scottish. It's national, but it's still in Scotland, and it's all very pretty up in Edinburgh. Jackie and I were talking about it before. It's very, very pretty, and there's a little Christmas market, little fair, and above all, a fantastic festival, not forgetting that. So we'll see you next week, same time, same place. And in the meantime, just hang on while Angelo plays this video clip. And if you have any queries, you know where Jackie lives, up at the NMC. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
So a midwife in the UK has to be registered with us as the regulating body. They will have undergone extensive training, either 3 years or 2 years, to become a midwife. And you cannot call yourself a midwife in the UK unless you're registered with us. And it's also a protected function, so only a midwife or someone in training, a doctor or a student midwife, can give that clinical care in labour and birth. The role of the midwife is to support that woman throughout her maternity journey, providing clinical care, and importantly throughout that continuum through the pregnancy, labour and birth, and in the postnatal period. Responding to any questions, any needs that they might have, but really importantly putting the woman at the centre of all the care, so that you're taking into account their views, their preferences and their decisions. So our role ultimately is at the NMC is to protect the public, and we do that by making sure that only midwives have all the skills in order to register and then maintain their registration. And those standards of proficiencies and the code are there to reassure really the public that when they are cared for by a midwife, that they will be practicing to a certain standard, and that their education and training will be up to date to reflect those standards and the code. So in a way, that is the benchmark on which to judge a midwife's practice.
Doulaing is not a regulated industry, so you won't find us on any professional register or anything like that. We are non-medical people. Most doulas don't have any medical training, and if they do, they don't use it in a doula setting because that's a very different hat to wear. We provide information, we provide non-judgmental, continuous support to people. We provide emotional support and practical support to families during the pregnancy, during the birth, and then in the first few weeks of parenting.
Some women don't have the support network they need. They don't have the partner or they don't have family. And it's very much for them to choose who they need to have around them, particularly in this very vulnerable time, for them to have that support. And when we're all working together, and particularly that intensive psychological support that the doula can offer, it can release that midwife to really concentrate on some of that clinical care that they need to provide. But it is absolutely working in partnership together. Because we're all there to support the women, support their choices. The midwife will continue to give that support and the guidance in terms of the care to be given based on evidence, thinking about when maybe things need to change, and the doula will be there to sort of reinforce that psychologically. But it can be a very powerful and most important supportive experience for that woman when it does work well.
So absolutely, I would echo what Jackie has said, but also what we know about hormones and what we know about the positive impact of continuity of carer is that if a client has a doula and has been working with them through the pregnancy and then through the labour and birth, when we get to the place of birth, if they are confronted with a virtual stranger, it can slightly alter the process of the flow of hormones. But if they have that person with them that they already know and trust and have that, relative confidence in, then they are much more easily able to engage with the amazing care that the midwife is providing, because the doula is almost bridging that gap and helping to integrate that person into that birthing room.
It is very much a privilege to have that window of opportunity to potentially make an impact in that family's lives as they transition to become parents. It's a moment in time when they're actually very open to education, learning about being parents, because they want to do the best for that baby. And I don't think that can be underestimated as a midwife. I've been a midwife for many, many years now, and I still feel that excitement. I still feel that passion. But what I really want to really hope that we get to is that woman's place is absolutely central in terms of what she wants. There's no right or wrong way of doing things. We need to give the evidence, we need to give the advice, but ultimately women do need to make those decisions, and we're there to support those decisions and keep them safe and promote good outcomes.
I became a doula after the birth of my fourth baby. So I had a caesarean birth for my first, although it was a planned home birth. And then I had 3 home births. And after my fourth baby, I started supporting within the NHS for breastfeeding peer support. And then I wanted to do more like that. And when I realised that there was a job where I could, support families throughout the pregnancy and that perinatal experience, I knew that was the job for me. And there's nothing more amazing or no better privilege for me than witnessing a person become a parent and seeing that, maybe 2 go to 3 or 4 or 5. But yeah, that to be let in on that experience and to have people say that, I contributed positively to that experience is, it's like nothing else.
Well, normally a woman will often know that she is pregnant. She may have done a pregnancy test. So she contacts her midwife through her general practitioner, and then the midwife will make contact so they can do what they call a booking visit, which is a very detailed visit where they get all the information about that woman, but importantly, thinking about what she wants, working in partnership to support those needs throughout that pregnancy and labour birth, and a lot of information giving so that women can make those decisions based on high quality evidence. It's not for the midwife to make those decisions for her, but to work together to see what the woman actually wants. So it's important to book early as you can, because that then gives the opportunity for you to meet your midwife, to discuss the plan for your maternity journey, thinking about maybe any screening tests that you might want to have and what's going to be really important to you for your care. It also helps the midwife identify where maybe some extra support is. The midwife then can obviously offer opportunities for other people to be involved in that care, and that can be also maybe included for the doula. But it's to think about getting that relationship started right from early on in the pregnancy, so that that relationship can build and that trust can build, which is so important that women have confidence in the services and the people who are going to be caring for them.
If a family has chosen to use midwifery services, it's really important to understand that doulas are not there to get in the way of that. So doula's job is mainly to provide support. That's what we do. We support the woman or birthing person. We support the partner if there is a partner. We may support with other children. We may support with the extended family. But we also support the midwives or medical care providers in that experience. So when I work with a midwife, so many times it's an amazing experience for everybody. And if we work together, it provides a better outcome for the family, and they feel more satisfied, they feel happier, they feel like their choices have been respected, and that's what we're all here to do together, but not not in competition with each other, certainly. And when we work in harmony, that's when it works the best.